All right, well, all indicators are that a significant portion of the Nikon world's kind of bouncing up and down in anticipation right now. So by popular demand, we're going to talk about the brand new Z9, the 100-400, and the 24-120. Well, hey everyone, Hudson here. Exciting stuff with a bunch of Nikon announcements. This particular approach in the scene is going to cater more to the people who are Nikon aficionados or industry, such industry addicts that they want to know what's happening with Nikon if they're not Nikon shooters. Before I jump into that and lose some of you who aren't as interested, I just want to make sure you know office hours. On November 16th, as usual, it's going to be on Zoom and YouTube Live, big free-for-all meeting. Any photographic topic this time. We're not limiting it. Maybe a lot of open Q&A. Might showcase some images from this last month, 3 workshops in Yellowstone, the Tetons, and Moab. Pretty awesome time out there with a great crew. So Woody, David, Rick, Darren, me will join up with you on Zoom or YouTube. Sign up at hudsonhenry.com/office hours. Submit a question there. As usual, the questions that come in via office hours or email or in the comments on these videos really drive the content that we produce. All right, so thanks everyone for being a part of the Approaching in the Scene community, sharing, like, and subscribing. It makes a huge difference. All right, so the Z9 and the 2 new lenses announced this last week by Nikon are super exciting. Been waiting for those lenses a long time. I think everyone's been waiting for the Z9 a really long time. And just because of the flood of questions and comments and emails that I'm getting, I'm going to talk about my thoughts on this camera and its announcement before I've actually got the camera in my hand, something I don't normally do. I have one of the very first pre-orders in for this body and for both of the new lenses, and I'll let you know what I think as soon as I get it. They're through Nikon Professional Services, so I should get them pretty fast. I think I'm up near the top of the line. So why are people so excited? What is so interesting about this particular camera? Well, part of it, I think, is that there's been this weird misperception that Nikon is somehow way behind or dead. And I really don't think any of that's been fair from the very beginning. And I think I've pretty stridently been on that note for a long time. I think Nikon did a pretty amazing job with version 1 of mirrorless as late as they got in the game. I think that Canon has as well. It took them a while to recognize what was happening, but when they jumped in full guns blazing. And I think that, when we really look at the system, this Z9 is sort of version 2.0 of Nikon's mirrorless system. Nikon always does things in version 1 and then version 1S or 2. And so in this case, we had the Z6 and the Z7, the Z50 come out, the Z5. Then you had the Z6 II, the Z7 II, the ZFc. Those have extended shutter speeds up to 900 seconds, a little bigger buffer, a little optimized autofocus system, faster processing, dual processors in the Z6 II and Z7 II. Much deeper ability to shoot a burst for a longer duration. Just kind of an update to the original camera. The Z9 represents the next generation, much more advanced technology. And that will filter down. They always start with their biggest pro build bodies. They want you to see the sports photographers that are working for the wire services, working on the sidelines of your NFL game or soccer or whatever the major sports are, the big wildlife shooters out there with those cameras. They want the professionals. You want to see the presidential press briefing littered with Nikon Z9s. That's prestige. It's also that big ticket item that drives the technology down into the lower priced cameras. And I think it's really in Nikon's best interest to push that technology into new replacements for their lower end cameras and make some cheaper, easier to access cameras for the masses. I don't think everyone needs the Z9. We'll talk in this video about what excites me about it, what I wish it had that it doesn't, or what makes me a little bit sad about it, what I'm super curious to test in it, what equipment it might displace in my Nikon arsenal that I currently have, who this camera is for, and then we'll talk a little bit about some of the video capabilities at the end. I know a lot of people are less interested in that. As always, there's a table of contents sort of chaptered out along the bottom of this timeline. You can see the different sections with headings. You can also click in to show more in the video's title, or just click on the title depending on your platform and see the full video's description. There'll be links to pre-order the products that I'm talking about, the Z9, the lenses. Also, you can always find those at hudsonhenry.com/ATS links. Those links help me out and I really appreciate it. My links to pre-order this stuff is through B&H Photo. They are really, really good at keeping track of who's at what place in line and not, messing people over when they've been waiting a long time for a product. And they tend, because of the size and volume that they do, to get more of the product. I just find I have a better time getting difficult to get products from B&H, and I like working with those guys. They're wonderful to work with. So again, those links help me out, and I appreciate your using them. hudsonarea.com/ATS links. All right, so why am I excited about the Z9? Well, as I said, it's the next generation technology. It comes from the sensor that's in the camera, this new stacked sensor. Rumor is it's not made by Sony, by some other manufacturer. Stacked means it basically has sort of like a motherboard for a computer, RAM, memory storage, and the image sensor all kind of built into the chip so that it can flow data through it much faster. It's all in the silicon. And that's enabling some kind of industry first, like an interchangeable lens camera of this full frame interchangeable lens camera with no mechanical shutter whatsoever. They're saying that they can process data through this chip so quickly that they don't need one, even for complicated lighting situations and flash photography. It'll be really interesting to test that theory out. They're saying it has great low light performance, even for a high megapixel camera, like 47 megapixels to get the 8K video that they want out of this camera. It's really interesting. It seems to me like the beginning of the next revolution. You've got mirrorless, now you're getting shutterless. Our cell phones don't have shutters, and that enables some computational photography in our phones that we can't currently do with our mirrorless interchangeable lens cameras, like taking 10 frames at the same time, averaging them out, reducing the noise and the shadows while pulling the detail out by doing that sort of stacked computational photography. Lots of interesting things might be coming down the pipe because of this switch to a completely shutterless system. And to be fair, Sony's A1 and A9 and A7 and a lot of the Sony cameras have done their high-speed photography shutterless for quite some time, but they still rely on a shutter for certain situations. I think this new chip pushes the boundaries to where it can be done a little bit differently. That faster computation and the new image processor that they've put in this camera enable them to process 11 megapixel JPEGs at 120 frames per second. And I've heard some people saying, well, what difference is that between pulling a still frame from slow motion 4K? Well, slow motion 4K recordings tend to be so highly compressed that any kind of still frame you pull from it is not going to be very high quality. A full, good Nikon 11 megapixel JPEG, you can do a lot with. I remember the days when my 12 megapixel Nikon D700 was all I had, and I made prints 24 by 36 that look beautiful from sharp images with careful upresing. So it'll be really interesting to see the quality that comes out of that and the possibilities for capturing that decisive moment, like as the ball hits the bat, as the players collide, as the surfer is coming right off the top of the wave with the hair in just the right position. All these little moments that 120 frames a second will let you pick the exact 120th of a second that was the definitive frame. It's going to be difficult if you overuse that to cull through images, but it's an interesting feature. And I'm excited about 20 frames per second raw with a 1,000 frame buffer. That's pretty crazy to think about. 30 frames full res JPEG if you want it to be a little faster for hummingbirds or something like that, but you want larger resolution, more printability. It's exciting stuff, exciting stuff. It also is enabling them to be the first in the industry to have 9 different types of subjects automatically recognized by its autofocus tracking system, and to enable 3D auto tracking, which they've had in their Top Gun DSLRs for a long time. So it'll follow that subject around the frame and be able to keep up at 120 frames per second, full frame JPEGs. Pretty darn crazy. That's a lot of processing power. And it'll be really interesting. You don't have to decide whether it's wildlife or humans or birds or cars or trains or motorcycles or boats, planes. It's apparently ready to track all these different objects and determine which one is your subject and pick it automatically for you. And that's something I've been saying for a while, that the auto area autofocus system in the Nikon Z cameras is where their development has been driving. And that if you've got large frame filling subjects and you're tracking with them, the cameras, the first generation cameras with the latest firmware do an amazing job of keeping that subject perfectly focused in the frame. It's when you have a smaller subject that's more distant and not moving as much in the frame that they've struggled. And that apparently is much better in the Z9. I can't wait to test it. That's one of those things that's going to be a curiosity for me. there are times where you just need to initiate subject tracking, and they built that a little complicated in the original Z cameras. Hopefully they've made that simpler in the Z9, and hopefully you need it less. So that'll be really exciting. From what I'm hearing, those are both true. All right, so we've talked about the burst modes. True that the Sony and the Canon can shoot at 30 frames per second in compressed RAW. Not that big a deal to me. I'm happy to get full RAW at 20 frames a second. That's pretty exciting, especially with a 1,000 frame buffer. And if you need to be faster, the JPEG, whether it's full resolution at 30 frames per second or 11 megapixels at 120, is pretty insane. We'll talk about video stuff that sensor enables a little later. There's a whole bunch of little things that excite me that they did that a lot of us, including me, have been asking for, like making it so that the buttons and controls on the camera are backlit with a flick of the on-off switch so that you can see in low light. And for me, work with workshop students that may not know where all their controls are. Just boop, there it is. You can see it. It doesn't burn your night vision out. Just a little glow to let you see the controls. The play button moving from the top left, like it's been on the Z6 II and Z7 II, down to the bottom right. They did that on the ZFC too, interestingly enough, which I'll be talking about in a month here. I'm going to do a full-on Z50 versus ZFC comparison here on ATS and a ZFC user setup guide. I like the camera a lot. Anyhow, back to the topic. They moved it on the ZFC from the top left to the bottom right. Why is that important? Well, you're shooting with a long lens, like this camera's designed to be done. And to hit play with the current cameras, you have to reach back and hit the play button, or else you have to burn one of the programmable custom setting buttons on your lens to hit play so that while you're looking through the viewfinder, you can just review the image you just shot and make sure that the composition and that the exposure is right. Take a look at your histogram. You can do all that through the viewfinder without even looking up, through your diopter adjusted viewfinder. If you're a person who needs reading glasses like me, no more putting the reading glasses on and looking at the back screen. Just hit that play button, and now making it accessible by your right thumb, you don't have to change hand positions. It's just a move of your thumb, boom, and you can look at play through the viewfinder, hit the shutter button, and you're back firing. That's great, no hand movement. There is a dual button format so that you can format your memory card just by holding down two separate buttons at the same time, one with the left hand, one with the right hand for a second. You see it flash. Do you really want to format? Then you press them again. Formats the memory card after you've cleared it. That's much faster than diving through menus or putting it into my menu. It's just single tick, tick, you're off. You don't have to go through the menus at all. I missed that. That's been available with the DSLRs forever. The actually having buttons for autofocus to change modes with the wheels and area mode with the wheel, having a bracketing button to change mode and the bracketing gap and the number of frames with the wheels. Fantastic. Don't have to go into the menus for that or burn any custom buttons for those. And then more custom function buttons. That's awesome. What am I not so excited about? That covers the things I'm most excited about. The things I'm not so excited about are just it being big and heavy. I have loved how much technology they packed into the Z7 II and how much they put in the D850 and the D500 at smaller sizes than they did with the D6 and the D5. Because I carry things on big, long, multi-day backpacking trips, traverses over mountain ranges, things like that, where size and weight make a huge difference when you're backpacking everything. If you're working from the car, not such a big deal. But, I'm sure that the technology will filter down to smaller cameras, and we'll see whether I hold on to the Z9 or whether I trade up to some smaller Z8 or something in the next year or so. They're expensive. It's an expensive camera. It's a flagship. It is built tough, like all the Nikons are built tough, but even a little bit tougher, like the D6, the D5, made for war zones, made for hardcore wildlife and sports shooters to bang around with. And it's got all the technology in the world and dual controls for vertical and horizontal. It's gonna be a bit more expensive, but surprisingly less expensive than I was worried. I thought this camera was probably going to fall between $6,500 and $7,500 based on what I was hearing and what I was seeing from the rest of the industry. And I think removing the mechanical shutter completely saved some money, which they chose to pass on to their customers and make a statement with making it a little bit more affordable than anticipated. And for me, that made me more likely to jump out and test out the new 24 to 120 millimeter lens. We'll talk about that lens in a second. The price of the batteries bugs me. It uses the same battery standard as the D5, D6, but they've got a brand new one. I'm guessing that brand new one is required in order to run the camera off of a USB with power delivery, like a battery bank, like you can the Z6 II and the Z7 II, which is really nice, particularly night shooting or video shooting. But it's $230 for a spare battery, and based on Nikon's track record, it'll probably take a long time to get them. With this camera, as popular as it appears to be though, there are some aftermarket companies already making batteries for the Z6 II and Z7 II at a much lower price, and there are aftermarket batteries that'll work with the Z9 already because they work with the D6. They just may not allow you to do through power with the USB C power delivery. I'll test all that out, but it seems like $230 is a lot for a battery, so that's a bummer. I worry a little bit about the supply chain, just because there is a huge demand for this camera. My folks at B&H are telling me that it's off the charts, the pre-orders and demand. So if you haven't pre-ordered one and you want to, get out there, do it. I really would love it if you use my link at B&H. It's in this video's description again. But if not, just get it in there, because it may take a while to get these things with the way that logistics are working in the world. Between, the problem that happened in the Suez Canal and the port problems and COVID's disruption, supply chains are crazy everywhere. So I'm really crossing my fingers that Nikon can do a good job getting this into people's hands. But I worry about it because I imagine demand is outstripping supply here. Question marks that I have about the camera. What am I super curious to test? I'm very curious how well it performs at high ISOs. How much noise? This is a high megapixel camera, like the D850, like the Z7 and Z7 II. It's a high megapixel camera to enable that 8K recording and that oversampled 4K recording from the full 8K readout. And they needed to do that to compete. But when you pack a lot of megapixels onto the small piece of silicon, you wind up getting noise when you turn up the gain, when you amplify the light signal coming into that sensor. And you'll see that's why Sony's A7S is 12 megapixels. That's why the A9 is low megapixels, the D5, the D6. Those are action cameras designed to work with big long lenses that you need faster shutter speeds to handhold or work with fast moving subjects. And they're not as wide an aperture as our big wide-angle landscape lenses, so you wind up at a higher ISO to have that narrower aperture and that faster shutter speed. And so it really matters how good the ISO performance is with this camera. So it'll be interesting to test that. Be interesting to see if they're really right about not needing a mechanical shutter at all, no matter what the lighting conditions are like, or if you're doing strobe photography. I'm going to have to test out doing some strobe photography. I'm very curious whether the depth of field issue that I've identified, I'm not going to go into detail about it, but they're the only camera I know of that you can't, the Z cameras, you can't preview your final aperture at 100%, zooming around to check fine focus. You can with the Canon. The Sony shows you your final aperture at all times. Now, they are obviously into their fourth and fifth generation of mirrorless, so they're a little way ahead with some of the design principles, but I'm hoping that Nikon will allow me to say stop down to f11, zoom into 100%, and see whether or not the distant mountains are in focus as well as the rock in my foreground. You can do it in video mode with the Z cameras, but you can't do it in still mode. It's never made sense to me, and I really hope that they fix that gap. I feel like I'm a lone voice in the wilderness complaining about that. I got a whole video. I'll link it in this video's description. Just check the full description. Hit show more. I showcase the problem. Clean view. One thing that really bugged me, they added a clean view with no display overlay, no histogram, no exposure data, not anything to get in the way of just viewing your clean image through the viewfinder or on the back LCD to the Z6 II and Z7 II, but the only way you can access it is to program it to one of the custom buttons. Instead of just putting it in to the display mode cycle, there's a display button, and I don't know why just one of the presses of display doesn't go to a clean view. That seems like it would be the place to put it without using one of my custom buttons for that. All right, so those are questions that I have. I'll report what I find when I get it, along with doing detailed reports of what I find when I get this camera and doing a full setup guide for all of you walking through the menu how to set up your camera. Who's this camera for? This camera, to me, is really for professionals that demand high performance from their cameras, speed, shooting action in particular, war zone photographers, wire service photographers, sports and action photographers, political photographers, people who need a high frame rate, a really robust body to bang around as they're running, trying to capture the action. and you know, just a really fast frame rate. So wildlife photography, sports photography, clearly. You know, anybody who's got scads of money and just wants to have the very best, clearly this is going to be a camera that they order. I don't think it's the camera that you need if you're just getting into photography. It's not going to make you take better pictures. You know, it's the kind of tool that the seasoned photographer who really is starting to push the edge of the limits of the Z7 II or the Z6 II or even the Z50 or the ZFC or whatever camera you happen to be using from another brand. If you're pushing the edges and you look at the specs of this and you say, that could really help me in some situations where I've encountered that my camera is just not quite as capable, this camera's for you. Otherwise, I think it's just something to kind of keep an eye on and watch for the technology to trickle down. All right, that's enough. I'm super excited about it. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. And I kind of expect I'm going to have it before Christmas, and I can't wait to be taking it on the workshops that we have scheduled for next year. Workshops have been selling out really fast. A little side note, you can go to hudsonhenry.com/workshops. We've got a couple slots left in Death Valley. Costa Rica, the Palouse, Joshua Tree are sold out. I'll be listing workshops for the Oregon, kind of the surroundings, the beautiful nature around Portland, and a little bit in the city. For Yellowstone, the Tetons, we had such a great time this year there. We'll begin to schedule it a little bit earlier this year, and then we're going to do the Owens Valley with Fall Color and Milky Way over the bristlecone pines and the ancient bristlecone forest. So some cool workshops coming up. Those will be announced soon. You can see the dates at hudsonhenry.com/workshops. All right, so let's talk about the lenses really quick. I've been waiting for the 100 to 400, 4.5 to 5.6 since I saw its shadowy outline appear back when the Z6 and Z7 were the only Z bodies out. The Canon and the Sony versions of that are such incredible lenses, and I've never been a fan, I'm going to ostracize a few people here, but I've never been a fan of the 80 to 400. Its image quality is good, but it's just a slow functioning lens. And the 200 to 500, I just didn't love the image quality. I've been a huge fan of the 500 PF f-mount lens, and I use the heck out of this lens. But having that versatility of 100 to 400 in a smaller, lighter weight package is really exciting. The 100 to 400 is going to be 2 millimeters longer than this 70 to 200 S lens that I adore, the 70 to 200 2.8. It's going to weigh just marginally more. Let me see the stats on that. I have it written down here. The 70 to 200 is 3 pounds. The 100 to 400 is 3.2 pounds. So we're talking marginally different than your 70 to 200, and it gets you 100 to 400. The reports I've read are that just a simple small hand twist goes all the way from 100 to 400 to make the function really fast, and that it's light and easy to use. I cannot wait. I mean, they haven't made an S lens yet that I haven't adored. They haven't made a Z lens yet that I haven't been shocked and blown away with as I tested. I mean, they all tend to be at their sharpest from wide open to say f13 or 15 before diffraction starts to set in. There's not the usual bell curve. They're just sharp across the board and then drop a little off. It's crazy. So I can't wait to play with that lens. And it's entirely possible it might even displace my 500 PF. I'm not saying so yet, but maybe. The 24 to 120, I have that on pre-order. It's a constant f4. I really liked the F-mount 24 to 120 f4. It was a great all-in-one kind of travel lens. It was a little bigger, a little bulkier, and it needed to be stopped down a bit, say, f6.3 before it got really sharp. I'm going to guess that this new one won't have that problem. And if it has sharpness at all, like my beloved 24 to 70 f4, this lens has kept me from buying the 2.8 because it's so small, it's so light, it pairs really well with the Z bodies, and it gives you great quality, edge to edge, wide open all the way, just like all the other S lenses I talked about, all the way down to where diffraction starts to kick in at the narrowest apertures. My guess is that this 24 to 120 is going to have similar performance. It is not very much heavier. It's 1.4 pounds to this lens is 1.1 pounds. It's not much more expensive. It's $1,100 compared to $1,000. So, my gosh, I see myself selling this lens and carrying the 24 to 120, getting a much wider range, 24 to 70 versus 24 to 120. That's a huge amount of extra usable range for portraits, for isolating a subject, for doing extractive landscape work. Cool stuff. So I can't wait to test that. I'll let you know if it's as good as I think it's going to be. Then this lens is probably going to join my D500 over here in heading for the rubbish bin. Also the FTZii, the original FTZii adapter. I've never liked the tripod socket mount on the bottom of it. It makes it difficult when you mount your camera with an L bracket to your tripod to change the lens back to a Z mount lens, because this thing hits the tripod, so you wind up having to take the camera off, pull that off, you can't just switch lenses while you're on the tripod. The new one does away with this, it's just round. I think that's really the significant difference of the FTZii 2, and it'll make it easier to work with a body that has controls underneath the lens. I think that this design would limit the ability to work with the Z9. So if you're planning on using the original FTZii with the Z9, you might choose to sell it and get the new FTZii 2. For me right now, the only F-mount lenses that I work with anymore really are the 500 PF and the 105 1.4 when I want the most amazing portrait lens out there, or to work at a little bit more of a distance in really low lit conditions where the light gathering ability of this insane 1.4 lens just kicks butt. You know, I'm tempted to get rid of these last couple of F-mount lenses. These are really the only ones I use anymore, because the S lenses and the Z-mount lenses are just so much better. Even the APS-C Z-mount lenses, even the F4 Z-mount lenses tend to kick the old 2.8 F-mount lenses zoom butts across the board, and the primes are just fantastic. So big questions I have are, what's the performance with the 100 to 400 going to be like with the teleconverters, the 1.4 and the 2.0? I'll be putting a video out soon on performance with the 70 to 200 and those two teleconverters, doing a little analysis. But right now, I see myself, you know, I'm clinging to these two lenses, the 500 PF and the 105 from the F-mount family. I love my 70 to 200 2.8. But I could see taking the 100 to 400 in its stead if weight and matters, and I'm likely to encounter subjects that are further away. I would rather have that lens than this lens with the 2.0. I can tell you that right now. I'm just sure of it. I've got three primes that I adore. The 50 1.8, just an amazingly sharp, one of the sharpest lenses I've ever put in front of a camera. The 20 1.8, not much less sharp, and epic for doing night scenes. It just has no chromatic aberration. It's so sharp edge to edge at f1.8. It's just almost no focus shift. It's an incredible lens, particularly for night scenes. I mean, all the Z lenses are great for night scenes. This 105 millimeter macro, which I know is hard to get right now, is light, and it's the sharpest 105. I love 105 millimeter lenses, as you know. I hate to say it's sharper than this 1.4. It is sharper than this 1.4, this 2.8 macro, but still the 1.4 is special in another way. I can't quite get rid of it. And the 14 to 24, my favorite lens pretty much ever. That'll be staying with me. I'm going to get rid of this Nikon Z7 II in my hand after the Z9 gets here and I'm able to test them back to back, shooting some of the same images and really delving in and looking at image quality and ISO performance. I'm sure I'll get rid of it, because why do I need two 47 megapixel cameras? And I have the Z6 II, which I'm currently recording this video with, and it's a monster in low light. The Z6 II with its lower megapixel sensor is just incredible shooting handheld in low light. You know, I've got images at 20,000 ISO that I'm more than happy with, whereas I try to limit myself to 3200 ISO if I possibly can with the Z7. And we'll see where the Z9 fits into that. It's going to be a big question. All right, so that's my coverage of the Z9. I'm super excited about it. I hope that you are. I'm also really excited about the 100 to 400, and you know, only marginally less excited because of the 100 to 400 and the Z9 about the 24 to 120. And if you want to order any of those things or the FTZii 2, I've got links in this video's description. Delve in there, check them out. They're also at my links all the time, hudsonhenry.com/ATS links. That's updated with the gear I use across the board all the time, and I appreciate your using those. Remember, office hours is going to be on November 16th, 10 a.m. Pacific, Tuesday. Open Q&A, some images from the road from our last workshops because they were so fun. and I can't wait to show off some of the sites that we saw. We'll take a lot of your questions. Submit those questions at hudsonhenry.com/office hours when you sign up for Zoom or for YouTube Live. Whoa, my recording timed out. I went a little longer than I anticipated. And that's another thing I'm excited about the Z9. It apparently will do up to 125-minute clips at 4K or even at 8K. So that's exciting stuff. I forgot to talk about video too, really quick. It's industry first stuff. It comes out of the box capable of doing 10-bit N-Log internal. That's nothing new. Panasonic and Sony and Canon have done that. But with an upcoming firmware update, it's supposed to be able to do 12-bit ProRes RAW internally, which is pretty crazy. And it's also going to do 4K at 120 frames per second, full sensor readout, and do really, really fine sort of bin down 8K recorded oversampled to 4K, which is going to be really beautiful. I used that some with the Canon R5. It was amazing. So that's exciting stuff for the video shooters. Quick preview of things to come. I'm going to be doing a review of Nikon ZFc and a setup guide for people with the ZFC. I adore this camera. It's special. It has just a real nostalgic feel. People shine when they see it pulled out in front of them, which is nice for taking pictures of people in parties and groups and stuff. And I'm going to do it as a little bit of a Z50 versus ZFC. I think there are things that are great about both cameras. So I'll talk about which one might be better for a person that wants just a run and gun in the pocket kind of street shooting camera, or what you might get for someone who's just getting into photography and you don't want to spend a ton of money, because these systems are amazing and the lenses that they're making for them are amazing too. And I really hope that some of this Z9 technology trickles down into an APS-C camera that makes me as excited as the D500 did when it came out alongside the 850. All right, so some fun stuff coming up. Oh, also a Sachtler fluid head, brand new. Their active system. I got both the ZFC and that from B&H to kind of preview, see what I think of and share with you, and I'm really excited about both of them. So that's going to be coming over the next month. And beyond that, holidays are kind of upon us. Things are opening up a little bit. I hope that everyone is lining up time with family. It's like the most important thing out there. Staying creative, finding creative outlets, working on your photography, finding the good light, being safe. So lots of fun stuff ahead in this year. I'm really looking forward to these holidays with my kiddos and family. I hope you are too. Stay in touch. We'll see you next week.